I'm Louisa Wilcox, and this is Grizzly Times, where we speak for the grizzly bear and the wild places it calls home. We introduce you to scientists, filmmakers, policy experts, and others who share their insights and experience speaking and working on behalf of the bear. At a time of unprecedented human-caused change, grizzlies depend on us more than ever. To learn more about what's happening and how you can help, subscribe to our newsletter at grizzlytimespodcast.org.
This is Louisa Wilcox with Grizzly Times, and I am thrilled to have this opportunity to talk to a man I'm honored to call a friend, who's one of the most talented and dedicated photographers of wild animals, and whose devotion to his craft has taken him to remote country on all 7 continents. Tom is especially famous for his photography of wildlife in the Great Yellowstone ecosystem and for his book, The Grizzlies of Pilgrim Creek, with author Todd Wilkinson, that features a grizzly bear known as 399, perhaps the most famous grizzly in the world. In our own ways and for over 4 decades, Tom and I have been on a journey towards a more compassionate way of treating our fellow non-human travelers. It's a journey that's been fraught and bruising for many of us. And the stakes cannot be higher with the catastrophic extinctions of species caused by human persecution, intolerance, and development, now compounded by the threat of climate change. Tom was among the first who led me to think deeply about the institutional problems of state wildlife management, a system that still views carnivores as varmints. I just want to thank you, Tom, for your passion and your commitment to the wild and for being here today.
Thank you, Louisa. It's great to talk with you again after a while, and we have a long history, as you mentioned, and long friendship, and thank you for all you have done for grizzly bears and the wild, and of course your husband, Dave. He's done so much too, and have a lot of respect for both of you, of course. Thank you.
Well, we're all part of the clan of the bear, I think. And thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Well, maybe you can start by sharing some about your roots along the Platte River and your journey from being a boy who trapped and hunted to a man who chose a camera to shoot with instead.
Well, I grew up in Grand Island, Nebraska. My 3 brothers, both my parents were from there. My grandparents were from there, and so right along not far up the interstate, which a lot of people recognize only because they pass going somewhere else, I think. And the Platte River is adjacent to I-80, and when I was a boy, there was no interstate or big highways, and it was a great place to grow up. And my dad had a cabin on the Platte, mostly a hunting cabin, 1-room schoolhouse. And he had hunted there since 1932, and that's how I grew up, hunting and fishing with him. And my brothers were also pretty avid duck hunters in those days, and they kind of fell away from it over the years. But I was the sort of the black sheep that was more interested in being outdoors than my 3 brothers. But the river had a big influence on me, as of course my dad did. He was pretty crazy about hunting and fishing, and we spent our summers getting ready for the upcoming hunting season. We'd be painting our decoys, making decoys, and cutting brush for making it better for duck blinds, and I didn't know any better. And when hunting season came along, we spent every possible opportunity I had to, getting out of school, taking off extra days when the snow was flying and the geese and ducks were flying, and my dad would call the priest at St. Mary's Cathedral while I was going to school, and he'd say, "Well, Tommy would like to go hunting tomorrow. Can we get a dispensation for a couple of days going hunting?" And his bribe was that he would give him, we'd take him ducks and geese we were hunting. So we always got up anyway. I never watched football games or did a lot of things on weekends except hunting and fishing, which was I was passionate about. But during all those years, I think I learned a lot about animal behavior, just watching, other than ducks and geese, beavers and muskrats and a lot of other animals, other birds, of course. But I think it was that love of the river and love of being out more than killing something. My dad wasn't big on killing, and so, but it was about the sport. It was mostly about the sport or the challenge, or maybe the game in a way of hunting and fooling ducks or geese, what it might be, that drove me in a way to photography in the end. I trapped for a while. My dad was sort of a classic Midwest person who was taught that there were animals that were sort of the good guys, and that would be the pheasants and quail and ducks and geese and cranes, and then there were the bad guys, which are the raccoons and possums and skunks and foxes and coyotes, who were the egg eaters, or the bird eaters, and so he said we should trap somebody. We had a lot of raccoons that he thought we should call some of them, and so when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I read up on trapping, and I saw an article in the Field and Stream magazine, advertisement about taxidermy. So I got all this information about trapping and taxidermy, and I started trapping along the river. And I remember one day I found a foot of a raccoon in one of my traps, and then I realized that the raccoon was obviously chewed his leg off to save himself, and that made me think, I suppose, it's what courage and what heart this raccoon would do to set himself free. And then about 3 or 4 days later, I caught a 3-legged raccoon, a 3-footed raccoon, and realized she had come back again because he was probably hungry, and then I thought, that's really, of course I had to shoot him. I skinned all the animals that I trapped, possums and coons and muskrats and stuff. But I sold them to the local furrier. But I think that was one of sort of an eye-opening experience, or maybe an epiphany, that this poor raccoon had to chew his leg off, or his foot off. And I went to my dad and I said, this is really phenomenal. I don't understand. And so he said, maybe we should just quit trapping. He realized that was it was a cruel behavior. And so it was one of the early lessons, I suppose, that I learned that animals are so, I don't know, special and intelligent, and they just have wanted so hard to live, and then it's so easy for us to kill them that I changed a lot of my behavior in those early years. I was still hunting ducks for many years after that, and geese, but the more I learned about hunting and the more I felt for the birds, the more I wanted to get away from that, and I started photographing when I graduated from college. So I hung up the gun and started taking pictures with the camera instead, which was a lot more rewarding. And so that's what I did.
Well, you've talked a lot over the years about your view on killing wild animals, especially for recreational hunting opportunities, and how that robs everyone of the thrill and the wonder of being in the presence of the wild. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on this.
I think most of what I was concerned about is hunting for trophies and things like grizzlies and wolves, and not so much because we ate everything. We did it sportingly and ethically, as one might. As far as the bird hunting and the ducks and geese, when it was, we didn't shoot things at too far of a distance, so we could kill it cleanly as possible and all that. But there weren't any grizzlies, obviously, or cougars or anything left in Nebraska. There were at one time, but I was never against hunting for meat or for people who wanted to put food on their table for their kids and their family. And I still feel that way, pretty much. I just became against shooting animals like cougars and grizzlies for, quote, which is really fun. Under the name of sport, there's no sport in shooting either one of those species or wolves for that matter. And, of course, my lesson with the raccoon made me realize how barbaric trapping is and how much animals suffer and how pathetic it is. So and beyond that, that is not only you're killing an animal, say a grizzly bear, that maybe spend part of his life in a park, or wolf spends part of his life in Yellowstone or Teton Park, but once it goes out of the park, it might get shot, and so it never comes back in the park. And then people come to the parks like Yellowstone, the Tetons, would love to see a grizzly or a wolf. And one guy who's bent on trapping or killing grizzlies and wolves and cougars does steal that opportunity for millions of people with one bullet, one person, one bullet, an animal like 399, for instance, which I'll tell you about later. But I don't know, 5 million people came through Teton Park this last year, and probably 500,000 of those saw a bear or a wolf, and if they were shot or trapped, that would steal that opportunity from 500,000 people, which seems pretty selfish and stupid, and for somebody whose ego is driven by killing and hanging something on the wall. So, yes, I'm very, and even the big animals, like, trophies like elk and sheep, bighorn sheep, or whatever it might be, is sort of questionable. Most of those are all eaten. But then you get to Africa, and people who go there and shoot, elephants or leopards or lions, same thing. It's really pathetic. And you see, to be political, but I saw Eric and Donald Trump Jr. with a big leopard, trophy leopard over one shoulder and the tail of the elephant that one of the boys were holding up after he shot the elephant. I was just nauseated. But so I just wish people would, speak out against trophy hunting and hunting animals, quote, for fun. That there's nothing for the species and nothing for humanity and people's enjoyment. It's just beyond my comprehension now. But it took a long time for me to come to that conclusion, I suppose, because when I was a kid, I was shooting with my BB gun and air rifles, sparrows and other birds. And, of course, when it was my shotgun with my dad, I was shooting ducks and geese and pheasants. But it took me a while to come to all these things. But it's good for me because the hunting gave me the background to have the patience that I do now for photography, which is no different, and the skill and the craft of sort of knowing where to be, during what season and place for getting photographs. It also gave me the knowledge of, how important hunting is to some people. It was to me in those days. And then I sort of evolved, or I don't know, grew out of it, out of the killing, and because I learned too much about the animal itself, how sentient they are, and intelligent, beautiful, and family life, and their social being that they are. So I'm lucky, and people can't say now, tell me that I'm a tree hugger or something. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and the hunters pay for, now that a new term is bark biter. That's a good one, tree hugger to bark biter. But I'm happy to be called either one if that makes people feel good. But I've got, since I grew up hunting, I know all the ins and outs and all the rationale, and I won the world's goose calling championship a couple of times and the duck calling championship in Nebraska. And so I obviously spent a lot of time hunting. So hunters can't call me. They pay for all the wildlife for us common folk or photographers or tourists enjoy, and that's totally crap. But I've learned a lot over the years and come to different conclusions.
Well, also, over the years, it's impossible to ignore the growing severity of our global extinction crisis, not only from the behaviors you describe of, excessive killing, but, excessive consumption, and now the massive problem of climate change. Tom, how have you personally been affected by the crisis? And maybe how do you see your art as a way of helping to tackle the problems?
Well, there's just too many people on Earth. It's number one, and that's the major reason for climate change. And Paul Ehrlich wrote many years ago about population explosion, and we don't really talk that much about population anymore. I'm not sure why, but maybe it's not so PC, but we need to, yeah. But that's just really drives climate change and changing habitats, and we're just losing habitat because there's too many people, and you go to the big places like the Amazon, which is being burned for palm oil or whatever, trees are cleared, and which not only destroys habitat but adds to pollution and warming of the earth. And so there's a lot of it comes from, and the U.S. is right up there with the things we do with affecting climate. It's not just countries like Brazil or Africa. But when I was in Antarctica last year, South George Island, where the penguins, most of the penguins are, I saw some glaciers I saw 10 or 15 years ago that were once they were tidewater glacier. They came down to there'd be a little beach, and they're massive, maybe 20 stories high, 30 stories high, and a mile wide. And what was a glacier 10 years ago, we were actually floating on last year because they had melted and they were gone. And so those kinds of things are really obvious and in front of me, people. But then you multiply that by all the glaciers that are melting and the rise of the oceans and what's going to happen. And it's pretty. Climate deniers are pretty. I don't know. I don't think it's that they're unintelligent. I think it's more about money, obviously, and politics, and I just don't know how anybody could deny that there is climate change when it's so obvious, and it's affecting so many species in so many ways, birds and mammals, and of course people living on islands get flooded out. A lot of our coastal areas in the United States are going to get flooded out, and we need to do something now. And it's really glad to see that yesterday President Biden is introducing some bills to help move to cleaner energy and renewable resources and away from the coal and gas. But
Yeah, it's about time, but at least he's showing leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. The last administration obviously didn't, and we went backwards so far in the past 4 years. There's so many environmental regulations and laws and favoritism to oil and gas industries, and that it's going to take a long time to get back just to where we were 4 years ago, let alone where we should be 10 years ago. But as it starts, I'm hopefully optimistic that this administration will make some changes and, rejoining the Paris Climate Accords and stuff is a big step. So I'm hopeful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that this administration is not going to be able to get to as directly, I think, is the issue that you've been confronting for these many decades of state wildlife management. These states, wildlife management in the country is done by states, and particularly in the West, they, in most cases, are the bastion of manifest destiny. And the related notion that we not only hold dominion over all the world, but that we have the right to kill any animal that inconveniences us. And even though there's this huge shift among most Americans away from this mentality, the institution still prioritizes, providing a shrinking minority of hunters with opportunities to kill stuff. And I remember you were one of the first people I knew who confronted Wyoming game and fish managers about their treatment of wildlife, especially cougars. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what it's been like for you to navigate this fraught arena.
I think growing up again, I think I was taught to respect state agencies or the police or the cops or the federal, game wardens or whoever it might be. But I would just, that's what we did. And then I started, questioning a lot of things when I got a little bit older, like in college and high school, and then see how most of our wildlife management is based on hunting and or fishing, but mostly say on hunting. The laws are written in favor of the hunters and in favor of killing basically as many animals of the species in a particular area as that area and species can tolerate before maybe the population retreats or crashes. And that's and all in favor of taking, selling as many licenses as possible and pleasing the hunters and the outfitters for the money that they gain from guiding, say, hunters for whether it be elk or deer or cougars or bears or whatever it may be. But they're totally beholden to the Game and Fish Department, are beholden to the hunters who depending on whether they're hunting for the family, it'd be one thing, again, for meat on the table or for trophies. But it goes again to, who has a right, or the animal itself has its own rights, of course, and the right to kill something is questionable, especially for sport. And the Game and Fish seems to ignore that. And when I asked Dan Thompson, who's the head of the my dog out there barking at a tree squirrel. So
it's great.
Yeah, I need to train him better. Yeah. Right. So I started the Cougar Fund, as you may know, maybe 1999, because I watched a family of cougars on Miller Butte, the National Elk Refuge, for 42 days. And I watched a female cougar. They had 3 kittens that were about 8 or 10 weeks old. She would disappear every evening and go hunting, and she might be gone for 24 hours or 36 hours some days, and she'd come back and then nurse the cubs. And I realized during those 42 days, if she didn't come back, that the kittens would starve to death because they're totally dependent on her coming back and And unlike wolves that bring, food back or coyotes, she's nursing these kittens, and they have no chance they can't leave the den, they can't leave this cave. And so when there were days, there was 36 hours, or one day it was like 48 hours, she didn't return. I thought, oh crap, she probably got killed outside the refuge and the park, because there was a hunting season on cougars, and there was originally it was just a quota of 1 a few years before that, and there's a quota of 2 of how many they could take in this particular county or area. And then and that year there was a quota of 2, and it was proposed that they would raise the quota to 6. So after the cougars left Miller Butte in late March, when the elk started migrating and their food sources disappearing, the cougars left the den, and I went to the Game and Fish and asked, what protections you have for kittens getting orphaned. And I knew that they were dependent on their mothers from anywhere from 12 to 24 months. And so it's a long period, not like elk or deer or something. It might be 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And the biologist there, Dave Bridmeyer, he told me he was somewhat in charge of setting seasons and quotas and stuff. He said, well, you can see right here, and he showed me a little brochure that said, you can't shoot cougars with cubs at side, which meant, you can't shoot a cougar that has cubs that are next to it, I guess. And I looked at that and thought, well, I'm not a cougar or mountain lion biologist, but watching this family for 42 days, and she never took the cubs with her, except up to she'd kill the cow elk right at the top of the den and one below the den one day. But other than that, she just traveled alone, and the kids just sat there and waited for her to come back. And so I said, well, they can't travel in deep snow. It's January, February, March. And, I said, what? I don't get it, because he's no. And so I looked at him and I said, well, she never took the cubs with her, so how do you rationalize that? And he looked at me like, are you kidding me? It's like he was living in a Disney world, that, the cubs are, and mountain lions are opportunistic, and they're hunters. They hide in rocks or wherever it might be, where an animal might pass by and sprint and kill it. But you can't have 4 cubs, 3 cubs, or 2 cubs gambling about or all around you if you're going to be an ambush hunter. And so that alone, plus they can't walk in the snow, plus. So it seems like if a Game and Fish guy who is in charge of managing cougars and doesn't really know that much about their behavior, it's pretty amazing that kind of stuff happens, and it happens all the time everywhere, not just here, not just that species. But that's when the lights went on for me and the bells went off, like holy shit, they don't know. And so I started going to Game and Fish meetings and asking people about, why are we killing cougars and leaving cubs to die in the den if they get hunted? And there were people, I said in one big meeting of 50 people, I said, how many people in this room think it's okay to kill a cougar and leave kittens starving to death? And 2 outfitters stood up and said, well, it's just collateral damage. It's like, well, I thought, bombing villages in Vietnam or something, and you kill a bunch of innocent kids. That's how cruel and how inhumane and how incredibly barbaric that was, and that attitude. And so we started the Cougar Fund to better educate people about the value of cougars on the landscape and bears and bulls and everything else. But it was amazing to me that when I asked Dan Thompson a year or 2 ago at a forum they had at the Center for the Arts here, why are we killing cougars? And he said, well, it's because we are mandated as a Game and Fish to provide hunting opportunity for our constituents, which I had heard from other people many times, that providing hunting opportunity for our constituents is the key phrase. And I said, so in other words, you're providing fund for your constituents. So they're killing cougars for fun. Is that right? And he sort of stuttered for a minute. He said, yeah, that's basically it. He couldn't get out of it because there's no, and then, of course, over the years, and we're talking to you and Dave, of course, your husband who knows more about cougars than most everybody, that there's no rationale to kill cougars except for really, face-to-face, one going to is attacking your child or your horse or your foal or your cat or your dog maybe. But, everybody, and there's not, anyway, so we used to, it's a cougar phone, we thought, well, we're not going to be those tree huggers that, if there are no more cougar hunting, we would say, okay, we'll play along with this, but, can you maybe protect the females? And they said, well, we don't shoot females, we shoot mostly males. And you look at the data, and it's like 48% females are killed that year and 50% male. So in the same way in Colorado, we went to Colorado and found the same thing. And the head of the commission in Colorado said, we don't shoot females in Colorado, and you don't need to come here from Wyoming and tell us what to do. And I said, well, you actually do shoot females. He showed him the data, his own data, which he didn't know, but he was on the commission, and that's a whole problem with the way our game of fish and management is set up. It's driven by the hunters, outfitters, sportsmen for fish and wildlife, NRA, and then down to, the governor appoints the commissioners who make the final rules that are brought to them by the game and fish departments about what can be hunted, how many can be hunted, how many can be killed, and the commission, who's made up generally of non-biologists, non-scientists, non-researchers. For instance, in Wyoming, I think we have 3 lawyers, 3 ranchers, and I think insurance agent or something. But it's always been that way. They don't have any environmentalists. They don't have any people speaking from a scientific standpoint on the commission. And so it's basically a bunch of good old boys who end up making the rules and regulations in the end about our wildlife. And when I'm saying our wildlife, it belongs to everybody. It does not belong to just the hunters and the outfitters who make a lot of money on it. So that's our challenge. Is we really need to come up with a different game management system, and it's very difficult because it's been that way for so many years, and it's ingrained. And we as in the conservationists, we've offered to come up with money for them so they don't, they're losing license sales yearly, so there's fewer and fewer hunters, and they're going basically extinct. And they're losing money, so they keep grasping onto the old ways. And even though they have people like me or others that say, well, we can help raise habitat money for you with buying habitat stamps or whatever it might be. But we also want a seat at the table. Well, they're happy to take our money, but not to give us a seat at the table. So, right. So that doesn't work. It just works against us. So it's just a real difficult situation, but that's a main problem. And I've been to so many meetings, and they're required by law to have public hearings and things, but it's pretty much so weighted towards hunters. They've been they come to these meetings and you're lucky to get out of there alive if you're, I'm not, again, anti-hunter, but I think shooting, again, predators for fun is insane.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say I've been truly terrified going to Wyoming Game and Fish Commission meetings and when wolves come up. I mean, it is really, as a woman standing up in that venue is truly traumatizing. And it is, I think this debate is, as you say, having an opportunity to get a seat at the table for non-hunters, bird watchers, anybody who has a different ethos than killing. And that is, ultimately the challenge I think we face.
Yeah, no, it is so in these western states. Even if the governor, if you had a governor who was sympathetic towards environmental ethics and things, he would be overridden by the legislature, who would then tell the commissioners, what to do. But it's split politics. It's all about money and politics, as most things are.
Absolutely. Don't miss part 2 for more on Tom's deep connection with the matriarch of Grand Teton National Park, Grizzly Bear 399, and the recent drama around stripping endangered species protections for Yellowstone grizzly bears and opening a sport hunt.
If you want to learn more about the grizzly and what you can do to help, subscribe to our newsletter at grizzlytimespodcast.org. And if you can, give us a review.